From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South, and I am Sonia Gray. Overnight airstrikes by Israeli forces have destroyed several enclaves in the Gaza Strip, and yet another rise of violence. The Hamas-run television station Al-Aqsa Television was one of the targets. Israeli airstrikes pounded the communications media building after Hamas evacuated it. This renewed violence escalated on both sides after a deadly Israeli operation in the Gaza left 7 Palestinians dead on Sunday.
We were at home getting ready to go to sleep when we got a call from the neighbors and employees of the TV station that the Israelis would target the Al-Aqsa TV. As in every war, it is a target.
As soon as we saw rockets, we ran away from the house. We're civilians. We don't have weapons and rockets. So, as soon as we heard the shelling warning fire, we escaped.
Israel has also bombed a hotel in the Gaza Strip and claimed to have destroyed Hamas's military intelligence operation and spying capabilities. At least 8 people were injured during the blast in the Al Amal Hotel. The building was located near a school and was in a heavily populated area. This is the most serious fighting that has occurred on the border since the 2014 war. Now to Mexico, where a group of journalists has reported that at least 2,000 mass graves have been found across the country in the last 10 years. Almost 3,000 bodies were recovered from these graves, which were found in 24 different locations throughout the country. Authorities in 8 states refused to collaborate with the investigations. Relatives of those missing accused the state of lacking the will to find their loved ones, as well as the persons responsible for their disappearance.
We don't know what happened to them. The Attorney General office says there is a number of disappeared, but in the news we learn it's really another one. We don't have a rule of law. This is what our country really deserves.
In our case, most of us mothers have searched for our children digging ourselves. It is very painful and sad, and even more as we recognize that it was the state that disappeared them.
The journey to the U.S. has proved to be even more difficult for LGBT members of the migrant caravan. Many have reported being faced with hostility from local residents upon their arrival to the city of Tijuana as part of the first group of the caravan. They arrived at the local bus station to make their way to a shelter provided for by a donor, but before they can even get through the door, they were met with opposition from neighbors who voiced their disapproval at their presence.
We're surprised, impacted, we're uncomfortable because the authorities didn't consider us. There is a municipal president here, a delegation that should have told us. Neighbours were asking for your support, your collaboration. People are going to come.
A small group from the first migrant caravan in Mexico has already reached Tijuana, which is on the U.S. border, but the bulk of the caravan is still on its way to Guadalajara. Our correspondent in Irapuato, Pablo Perez, has more.
Well, today we're right here at the outskirts of Irapuato city in the state of Guanajuato, Mexico. And right now we're seeing how all these migrants, they are members of the first migrant caravan, are trying to board freight trailers to go all the way to Guadalajara, Jalisco, which is the next stop scheduled for this caravan. Right now we can see that very common image of the migrants riding the train that they name the Beast. It's no longer the most usual way to travel for them. They are trying to get a ride from the freight drivers, and well, this is something really different because there is some willingness to do that. It has to be. If there is the police officers, they are asking every driver if they are taking the migrants by their own will, or they are getting paid, or because getting paid for that will be considered a misdemeanor. But if the driver says, no, I'm giving them a ride from my own goodwill, they cannot stop him. So this is another way for them to get faster to the border. And let's remember that we have already covered over 700 miles, but we have 1,500 on our way to go to Tijuana. That's the border with San Diego, California, which is the entry point. Most of these migrants will consider their destiny. And well, we will go on informing you, and we'll go back to the study.
We thank Pablo for that report. Now, another group of migrants is fast approaching Mexico City from the southern state of Veracruz. Several groups of migrants have joined together to travel through the state on Mexico's Gulf Coast. Some walked down the highway, while others jumped onto the back of a truck to catch a ride north.
We're looking for help to get rides on trailers or something like that, to leave the state of Veracruz. Sometimes rumors come up of someone going missing of one thing or another. We prefer to arrive in Puebla and keep advancing from there. Wherever we are, we advance north as much as we can.
Switching gears now, a new investigation has opened against Peru's former president, Alberto Fujimori, this time related to forced sterilizations. The prosecutor, Marcelita Gutierrez, accused Fujimori and 3 of his former ministers of the practice, which allegedly took place during Fujimori's term in office. According to the Ombudsman Office, nearly 300,000 forced tubal ligations were performed between 1996 and 2001. Over 2,000 women reported being sterilized without their consent or proper information on the procedure. And members of the public health system in Peru have been on strike for 6 days after being repressed by security forces. More in this report.
Peruvian security forces fired tear gas canisters and rubber bullets against public hospital workers, stopping them from getting near to the premises of the Ministry of Health. Workers have been on strike for 6 days without reaching an agreement with government officials.
The government prioritizes political issues instead of prioritizing people's health. We will continue marching. We will discuss these issues in different meetings because we have the conviction within us. We are worthy, and we deserve some respect.
Delegations of hospital workers from across Peru have joined the strike in Lima. They set up tents outside the Ministry of Health, where they plan to remain indefinitely until the government finds a solution for their demands.
From Puno, the most forgotten region, where anemia has increased by 73%, where there are 22 maternal deaths caused by pneumonia. From there, we support this measure to show this government that we need some answers. We raise our voices and will continue fighting.
Delegations from the north of the country have also arrived, expecting the government to deliver bonds that by law belong to the health workers for having worked in extraordinary conditions under the El Niño phenomena of 2017.
In Piura, we had 547 health workers that got sick with dengue. And even while carrying that sickness, we had to show up to work. We had 3 co-workers who died, 2 of them with dengue, and who was driving an ambulance when he was caught by a landslide. His body was never found. And the only thing the government has done is to declare him a national public health hero.
These workers demand an increase on public health funds to get hospitals out of crisis. They also demand salaries increase and the hiring of 95,000 more workers under new agreements to give them work stability.
And still with news from Peru, 7 young soccer players and their coach have been killed in a bus accident. The group were on their way to play the final match of the local soccer league when the bus fell from a cliff. At least another 11 children were injured in the crash. 2 of them are in serious condition. The cause of the accident is still being investigated. We'll take a short break now. More news in a minute.
An occasion to enjoy the cultural diversity that defines our South American essence. Come along to find out the story behind these personalities, traditions, and artistic expressions that unite us as a whole. Real Lives, Friday, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. Over 500 members of Colombia's indigenous communities arrived to the capital, Bogota, after a 5-day journey to condemn the massacres they face in their territories.
After traveling for 5 days, about 500 people from indigenous communities in Chocó arrived in Bogota. They are here to condemn the many massacres they have witnessed on their lands, as well as forced displacement and the lack of security guarantees from the government.
This government has turned back our rights. They haven't given us guarantees for our lives or our land. They haven't been willing to talk to us, so we are forced into taking this sort of action.
Security forces were unable to stop the protesters, who decided to start a peaceful march after their buses were blocked from advancing.
They are not respecting us as indigenous campesinos. We couldn't sleep all night. We had to walk all through the night.
Holding a stick that represents the defense of indigenous lives and lands, the protesters call this a historic battle.
We are following the path set by our ancestors. We are standing up for their legacy.
This is why they have condemned the return of violence after President Iván Duque came to power.
Armed conflict has gotten worse in our lands due to the presence of illegal groups in the region. We are being displaced, we are being confined, we are being threatened. There have even been conflicts within our communities.
Protesters reached the headquarters of the National Indigenous Organization of Colombia, where they plan to remain until President Iván Duque responds to their demands. They want guarantees that the rights of indigenous communities will be respected.
The general strike in Costa Rica against the government's proposed tax reform has entered its 10th week. On Monday, teachers' unions presented an official complaint to the International Labour Organization. The education sector also presented a complaint against the government, condemning violations against the rights of trade unions. The strike started back in September to protest a tax reform demonstrators say could hurt the most vulnerable. Our correspondent in San Jose, Fernando Francia, brings us more.
It's been 2 months since the indefinite general strike started. Recently, more than 8,000 education workers and government employees joined the strike. A large part of the debate about the strike has been its legality, with different courts upholding its legality since it started back in September 10th. This has seen a huge support to the labor sector against the tax reform, which is being debated right now in the Constitutional Court. This court has to decide if the reform is unconstitutional or not. If they approve it, it will then move to the Legislative Assembly as a final step before being approved. Still, discussions about other ways to overcome the tax deficit in Costa Rica continue.
The Inter-American Commission of Human Rights has said it is concerned about the situation in Brazil following the recent election of Jair Bolsonaro. The commission said it is particularly worried about the future of Brazil's minorities once Bolsonaro assumes power on January 1st. In the run-up to the polls, Bolsonaro continuously made derogatory comments against Afro-Brazilians, women, and the LGBT community.
We're concerned because of these statements and what we in the international human rights community designate clear hate speeches that were made. So we're very concerned, and this is why we'll closely monitor.
And landslides have killed at least 15 people in Rio de Janeiro. After days of heavy rains, a great stone fell from a hillside in Piratininga, hitting a group of houses during the night. According to the local fire service, 4 people are still missing. 11 have been rescued so far with the help of sniffer dogs. close to 200 emergency personnel are working in the area with the help of volunteers, creating a bucket change to help remove mud and debris.
This is not a surprise tragedy because the civil defense goes up the hill and says that it is forbidden to live there, but they do not set up a house, do not create a project, nor give anyone a shelter somewhere else. Where will the poor live?
Argentina's Senate will be discussing the national budget for 2019 in a special session on Wednesday. The bill has already been approved by the lower house. Experts argue that if the bill is approved, the public sector and society will suffer greatly.
People are feeling the pressure of living under austerity due to the government's adjustments. They're suffering and they've had enough. They're turning to their MPs with their complaints and want them to find a way out of this turmoil.
What we are seeing now is not only a budget cut that means the erosion of our sectors, but also the denial of basic human rights.
The government has managed to get the 2019 budget to the Senate. The bill proposed by the ruling party has the approval of the lower house. If passed, the budget in public spending will be significantly slashed and the economy will go down by 5%, according to analysts. The new law will guarantee the interest of the International Monetary Fund and of international corporations.
Argentina is going to have to spend the next years with conflicting priorities. So, instead of worrying about the great internal debt to the social movements, workers, and public sectors, they're going to worry about the brutal external debt. And this is going to hurt the majority of people.
As part of a $57 billion agreement with the International Monetary Fund, the government of Mauricio Macri agreed to decrease its subsidies and cut public jobs.
It's a budget focused on decreasing public spending. That's going to hurt a lot of people. And it's a budget lacking credibility because in the 2019 projections, they talk about 23% inflation.
On Wednesday, the bill will be put before the Senate to advance the adjustment plans. Through this, many believe the government hopes it can better integrate with the nations of the G20, who are set to visit Argentina by the end of this month.
Trinidad and Tobago was rocked by a 3.9 magnitude earthquake, the latest in a series to rock the island. The earthquake was also felt in neighboring Grenada. No injuries or damages were sustained. A warning was issued earlier this month about moderate to strong earthquakes following a 6.9 quake that struck the country in August. Cuban President Miguel Díaz-Canel is making a stopover in the United Kingdom before he heads to the West Indies as part of his international diplomatic tour. More in this report.
The Cuban president's tour started early in the month. Miguel Díaz-Canel visited Russia, the Democratic Republic of Korea, China, Vietnam and Laos. His tour is particularly timely as the right wing in Latin America is making waves and Cuba's relations with the United States are fraying.
This tour has been very balanced. It has upheld its foreign policy objectives and has strengthened ties with countries that are of utmost importance on the international stage and remain friends of the island.
Miguel Díaz-Canel was received by the premiers of each country, including Russian President Vladimir Putin, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, and his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping.
It's important the new Cuban president formed close connections with the highest leaders of these countries. He has to prove that Cuba is not alone and has friends across the world.
In every country he visited, he explored opportunities for greater cooperation in business and managed to achieve agreements to this effect. For instance, Russia has agreed to invest in the technological sector of Cuba, and in return there will be investment opportunities for entrepreneurs and the government.
These are strategic relations. Trade with Russia reaches nearly $300 million, which doesn't reach the levels of trade with China that surpass $1 billion. But it's still an important source of investment in transportation, in energy production, and in railway infrastructure. Another topic that was discussed in Russia is cooperation in military matters. Díaz-Canel even mentioned the possibility of exporting Cuban products to China, which has the largest market in the world.
This tour has proven to the world, and particularly the United States, that Cuba is far from isolated, and despite the 60-year blockade, it's business as usual.
We're going to take another short break now. Stay with us.
The Pakistani journalist Tariq Ali examines the mass media influence promoted by imperialism. Get access to the analysis of the socio-economic and political life of the whole South America on our screen and platform in English. A critical place committed to the truth to determine the major events that transform the world today. Mondays, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. At least 42 people have died in two large wildfires that swept California since Thursday. More than 200 others are still being searched for by the authorities and emergency services in the affected areas in the north and south of the state. These fires are the deadliest and most destructive in California's history, consuming much of the town of Paradise. Further afield, thousands of Ethiopians and Eritreans have joined a 10-kilometer reconciliation run in Ethiopia's capital, Addis Ababa. This is the first joint sporting event since the two nations entered into a peace agreement back in July. The two countries fought a war from 1998 to 2000 that left around 80,000 people dead. Now the neighbors have restored diplomatic ties, trade and phone links, resumed flights and reopened their common borders.
Very happy. I don't know how I can probably express my happiness to you. There's nothing more than love, reconciliation, and happiness in this world. I am very happy.
I'm happy with the opening of the border. My brother has come back to Ethiopia after 20 years and we met.
The leader of the Democratic Republic of Congo's largest opposition party, Felix Tshisekedi, is abandoning a day-old agreement to field a joint opposition candidates in next month's presidential elections. This after the Secretary General of his party gave him 48 hours to back out of the decision in the face of protests.
1. The political party UDPS strongly rejects everything that happened in Geneva. 2. We ask our president within 48 hours to remove his signature from the bottom of this piece of paper.
Almost 2,000 drivers and passengers have been arrested in Kenya as police began enforcing long-enforced road safety rules. The rules require vehicles to be properly insured and have seatbelts for all passengers, for drivers to be licensed, sober, and to obey traffic signs, among other provisions. The crackdown resulted in long queues and unusually traffic-free streets as many drivers stayed at home rather than risk arrest. A young Ugandan entrepreneur has revolutionized the diagnosis of malaria. 25-year-old Maurice Atwine helped to create a mobile phone app that can tell if a patient has malaria without using blood tests. Instead, the device clipped onto the finger and using light and magnets detects changes in color, shape, and concentration of red blood cells. Malaria is the leading cause of death in Uganda.
On a personal level and still on a work level, it is communication. And when it comes more on work level, we are able to transition from doing apps for feature phones to doing apps for smartphones which is the way to go because the penetration is increasing in Africa.
Teachers are on strike in France for the first time since 2011. More on that and look at some other stories from around the world.
Teachers in France have taken to the streets of Paris to protest against job cuts in state and private schools. It's believed that the 2019 budget will lead to over 3,000 job cuts. According to the Education Ministry, around 10% of teachers nationwide were on strike. However, unions put the figure much higher at 50%. Teachers from primary, middle and high schools are striking for the first time since 2011.
At present, we feel like everything is going downwards. They're reducing our hours. They're reducing our budget. They tell us things that do not make sense compared to the reality of the field. They say we are a forum of excellence, while everything is in fact breaking down.
Iran is to be cut off from the international financial messaging system, SWIFT. This means it will be increasingly difficult for it to get paid for exports and pay for imports. Banks have started to inform their local branches of this action. The decision was made due to pressure from the United States after it withdrew from the nuclear deal and reimposed sanctions on Iran. SWIFT chief executive called the move regrettable but said it has been taken in the interest of the stability and integrity of the global financial system. Palestinians have buried several of their dead who were killed by Israeli forces in Khan Yunis in Gaza. Clashes broke out after Israeli forces tried to infiltrate the area. Israeli planes were also deployed as reinforcements. The area falls under territory occupied in 1948 during the creation of Israel.
That brings us to the end of this news brief. For these and many other stories, you can find them on our website at tellusyourenglish.net. And for our viewers in Africa, remember we are on Starstat Channel 461 in South Africa and Channel 539 in Nigeria. But everyone can join us on social media because we are on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. For Tell Us Your English, I am Sini Gray. Thank you so much for watching.